Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the public meeting of the United States Consumer Product Commission, Safety Commission. We have one item on our agenda this morning, and that is a decisional meeting on our FY 2017 mid-year review and proposed operating plan adjustments. We have 4 staff with us this morning here at the table in case there are any questions from the commissioners. We have Ms. Patricia Adkins, who is our Executive Director, Mr. Dwayne Ray, Deputy Executive Director for Safety Operations, Mr. Jay Hoffman, our Chief Financial Officer, and Mr. James Baker, Budget Officer and Division Director for Budget Planning and Evaluation. We will start with 10-minute rounds for any questions that the commissioners might have, and then we'll turn to the consideration of the rule. Let me begin by saying thank you to the staff for being here and for all of the work that goes into whether it's a budget, an ops plan, and in this case, the mid-year review. It just takes a lot of, I'm sure, up and down the elevator, and we thank you for that. I have a couple of questions. I just wanted to talk about just a few things in the mid-year. One of the things is the Anchorage Campaign. It's an award-winning I&E campaign, and I feel it's been effective, and I wondered if any one of you could talk to me about the effectiveness of the campaign.
What I'd like to do, Acting Chairman Burkle, is have Patti Davis come to the table because she's going to have certainly the more detailed information about the campaign.
Thank you. I'll welcome Patti Davis to the table. Patti is the Acting Director of our Office of Communications. Good morning, Patti, and thank you.
We feel our Anchorage campaign has been very effective. In fact, we've seen that we've really been able to move the needle from injuries reported every 24 minutes from tip-overs to injuries reported every 30 minutes. So what we are asking for is full funding to make sure that we can continue to push this out to parents, to caregivers, and others, and continue to increase the effectiveness and decrease the number of injuries.
Thank you. And when you say full funding, that is how much?
We've been asking for $400,000.
Do we have any other campaigns that are comparable to this that do the kind of outreach?
Well, we have our Pool Safely campaign, which is more than double that amount, which has also been very effective. We've seen a 17% decline in drowning since 2010 to kids under 5. And that is in large part due to our efforts and our partners' efforts.
Good, thank you. That's all I have with regards to Anchorage, and thank you very much. My other question has to do with the publication of monthly progress reports. I understand this morning that Commissioner Kaye is going to propose an amendment that would fund work on a system to permit publication of monthly progress reports. And I just am concerned about the timing of this project because what I see is the part 1 of that is the development of the mechanism to be able to report your monthly progress reports electronically. I see that as the first step here. So I wondered if one of you, I'm not sure, maybe Patricia or Dwayne, could provide me with an update on what I'll call part 1 of this project, that is the production of the ability to file electronic caps.
Sure. Currently, the Part 1, the submission of the monthly progress reports from the outside parties, it's well along in its planning phase. I do know they have some testing scheduled for this summer with volunteers to actually walk through the submission of the data. And I think the latest timeline that I've seen on that is they hope to complete that by the end of this fiscal year. Okay.
What would be the point at which it would be, you'd think that it would be the appropriate time to talk about publication of the reports on our website, given the fact that what I'll call part 1 isn't completed yet?
Well, I think we would definitely like to get some experience with the new process as far as getting the data in these new formats. And then from there, kind of work through what I call not so much a technology issue, but some of the process issues on how we would do that and effectively still meet our requirements under the law for publication and notice.
Okay, thank you very much. Those are all the questions I have this morning. Commissioner Adler?
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. I want to apologize for my lack of decorum in wearing a shirt, but the Metro was not stopping in Bethesda, so I had to take it to Medical Center and walk, I don't know how long, it felt like a very long time here. So anyway, I apologize for that. Actually, I have no questions because I have been consulting staff on a regular basis in preparation for today's vote, and they've answered my questions adequately, so I really appreciate that and commend you for a great job.
Thank you. Commissioner Robinson?
I have no questions either, and I just thank you for your very thorough responses to my written questions as well as my many, many verbal questions, and thank you.
Commissioner Kaye?
I have no questions. Just want to echo the thanks and appreciation for all the work. I know that it takes a long time, and it is laborious to respond to all the questions on top of everything else you're doing, so we really appreciate it. Thank you.
Commissioner Mohorovic?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I do have a couple of questions for staff related to the Anchorage campaign, and I recognize that staff has Anchorage funding at a relatively high level of priority in terms of competing with other activities and projects before the agency. First of all, in terms of how staff prioritized Anchorage so high on the list, could you provide some sort of context in terms of what informed that decision for ranking it so highly? Let me also say, of course, I saw that when I did see that Anchorage was at such a high level in terms of priority, I was very pleased to see that, and I just wanted to see if, for the Commission and for the public's sake, if you could just identify why staff considers it such a high priority, please.
Commissioner Mohorovic, I can share just process-wise. Certainly we get the guidance from the staff that is submitted to our Budget and Finance group, and as a result of that, it did come in high, certainly because of the interest in tip-overs that has been expressed, the work that's continuing to be done by our EXHR staff. So that was certainly one of the reasons why staff had moved it to the top for consideration. I'm certainly happy to ask any of my colleagues at the table to add to that if they have additional information.
I would just add one thing, and that is that the current Anchorage funding ends in September, so that was another factor that if we don't want to have a break in the campaign, it would need funding for a follow-on contract.
Thank you, Mr. Hoffman. That's very helpful to me. The procurement process and the bidding and the letting of these contracts can confuse the heck out of me, and I think you might be able to better inform that. If you could, someone might think, well, why don't we put this off? Can we put this off to FY18 without a break? Is that possible?
No.
It's not possible. So what would be, if you can, what would you estimate would be the amount of time in terms of a break in the messaging for consumers to properly anchor their products in the home?
Well, first I would say there is no funding in the FY 2018 budget programmed at this time, so the break would be until the Commission directed us either at their operating plan to allocate funding or if the Office of Communications decided to make that allocation.
Thank you. And maybe our Deputy Executive Director could inform this, but perhaps it might be informed by our Acting Director of Communications in terms of the overall impact on the program if we do have a break, if in fact the Anchorage campaign is deemed by the Commission as opposed to staff to be of a much lower priority, and we do have a break in funding for the program, assuming we can get funding back in FY18, which, as Mr. Hoffman said, it's currently not projected. What would that do to the effectiveness of the campaign, that is, having a break versus continuous momentum, perhaps?
Commissioner Mohorovic, if I could have Patti come back to the table, and I'm going to ask Patti to go on the certainly my left-hand side, to speak to the Anchorage, and we'll just pull up a chair.
Thank you, Commissioner. If funding ends at the end of September, our PSA PSA distribution would cease. Our social media outreach would be basically one person's job. Our partnership, we work to get advocates, anchor advocates, and others joining on. That would cease. So right now we're using a public relations firm to magnify what it is that OCM can do on this program, and most of those activities would cease.
Does a break in the potential funding have an impact in terms of our ability to leverage the other social media avenues to further the messaging beyond what we can pay for in our own media buys?
If we are granted the funding for Anchorage, we would have a robust social media campaign run by a public relations firm that we have yet to contract out to. And if not, it's basically just our own social media posts here and there, but it's not an actual program where we're working to affect change on a broader scale.
And if it does, if it were funded of course, the higher the priority, the greater likelihood that the program would get funded and completed. That would continue the program through about what point in time? Either Ms. Davis or Mr. Hoffman?
It would be 12 months.
12
From September through the next September.
So we would be assured. Thank you very much. A question also for our executive director and perhaps our deputy executive director. And looking at the Anchorage campaign, I think we would all recognize that this is a campaign designed to address hazards that are in the home currently, hazards that can't be impacted by voluntary standards work because the products have already been made, they've already been purchased, and they already reside in people's homes. And we know that 33,000 people go to the emergency room every year from injuries related to furniture tip over generally, 50 deaths a year, 30 deaths per year, of which 25 approximately are children. Either Ms. Adkins or Mr. Ray, could you describe, do we have any other programs to mitigate the hazard that exists in the homes right now from furniture tip over beyond the Anchorage campaign?
I'm not aware of a CPSC campaign other than the Anchorage campaign that addressed that issue.
I guess theoretically, if we identified some kind of products that was creating an unreasonable risk and we went into a recall, then theoretically that might be an activity of the Commission to mitigate the hazard. But generally, in terms of product that doesn't seem to fail to comply with any mandatory standards or voluntary standards, it's really the Anchorage campaign that we're relying upon to be able to teach parents and teach people in their homes about the hidden hazard of furniture, and especially placing those CRT TVs on top of inappropriate pieces of furniture. Anchorage is it.
That would be correct.
Anchorage is it. Thank you, Madam Chairman. Those are my questions, and thank you all staff for helping answer those questions.
Thank you. Commissioner Adler, Commissioner Robinson, any other questions? Commissioner Kay, Commissioner Rohovic. Having heard no further questions from the commissioners, staff is excused from the table. And again, my sincere thanks to all of you for all of the assistance to all of the offices during the course of the last 2 weeks in getting us to today. Thank you very much. We are now going to consider any amendments or motions that anyone might have at the dais. Does anyone have any amendments or motions for this morning?
I have an amendment, Madam Chair. On page 4.
Excuse me one second. Commissioner Robinson, I'll recognize you for your amendment and then ask you to describe it for 3 minutes and see whether or not any of the commissioners have questions, and then we will go from there. Is there a second for Commissioner Robinson's? Okay.
Did we get a second?
We're waiting for you to describe it, sorry.
Oh.
Thank you, Boaz. Thank you.
So the amendment that's being handed out is that on page 4 in table 4, I would move to delete items 1, 2, 4, and 5 and renumber the list accordingly, and make conforming changes in attachment 3, which is changes to mandatory standards table, and elsewhere as needed.
Is there a second to Commissioner Robinson's motion?
Second.
Having heard a second, we'll now move to consideration of Commissioner Robinson's amendment. Commissioners will ask their questions, and then at the end, Commissioner Robinson may answer them unless Commissioner yields their time.
Should I describe it first?
Oh, sorry, yes.
Okay. I was disappointed to see the recommendation to move 5 rulemakings under Section 104 back to DATR from NPRs or FRs. Well, I agree with the proposal on gates, and I think we all do, for gates and other enclosures, since we understand there are technical issues surrounding test methods. I don't think it's appropriate to move the other 4 projects, which are changing tables, folding chairs, high chairs, and stationary activity centers, back. The 104 rules are required by Congress, as we all know, and these are rules that are aiming at protecting our most vulnerable consumers, infants. Furthermore, it does not appear that there's any compelling reason to move these specific rules back from the goals we set in the OP plan. It's my understanding that with all of these projects, the staff has a mature proposal for a safety standard. Staff has proposed these to the ASTM subcommittees. The subcommittees have either approved or are very close to approving a standard in each case that includes all or almost all of staff's proposals. With some of these rules, the main delay appears to be administrative. No meetings have been set or delays with getting the ballot out. It therefore does not make sense to me to remove the incentive on all the players to arrive at a final ASTM standard and a final mandatory rule. I don't remember a single time in my nearly 4 years as a commissioner when we moved the targets on rulemaking back under similar circumstances. Of course, we've had rulemaking take longer than expected due to circumstances outside of staff's control, and when this has happened, we simply put them in the OP plan again the next year with an asterisk noting that they are carryovers. I'd certainly understand it if, due to circumstances out of staff's control, one or more of these rules end up sliding into the next fiscal year. That's the reality we live with, given our extraordinarily limited budget and resources. But it does not mean that we need to preemptively step back from the goals we set for this agency only a few months ago when we approved the OP plan. It's for this reason that I'm proposing that we do not amend the OP plan as it relates to those 4 104 rules, and we remove them from the list of changes to mandatory standards in Table 4.
Thank you, Commissioner Robinson. Commissioners will now ask their questions, and then we'll come back to you at the end of any questions, and you'll have 5 minutes to respond to those questions. I don't have any questions. Thank you, Commissioner Adler.
I don't really have any questions, but I do want to state that I'm going to reluctantly oppose this because I think that the points that Commissioner Robinson made are very good points. And it does strike me, looking at the 104 mandate that we have, that when Congress wrote this, they didn't have a good idea how long it would take to do rules along these lines. And I think we've struggled valiantly over the years to meet the deadlines that Congress imposed on us. And I do remember Chairman Tenenbaum picking 104 rules as her major priority in the years that she was here, and she pushed and she pushed and she pushed. But still, the 104 rules have slipped. And now, as we're 7 or 8 years into the drafting of 104 rules, and I guess I do have not have the same recollection as Commissioner Robinson, because I recall that we've had a number of points of slippage of the 104 rules. So I just don't see anything that's different now. I've asked staff, is there some slowdown that's taking place, some dawdling on ASTM's part? And I don't see that. I certainly don't see any slowdown or dawdling on the part of staff. So this, to me, is just part of the regular course, sadly, of rules that we hope we could get done. And I don't want to say welcome my world, but I saw table saws slip year after year after year after year, and talking to staff, and staff was working in good faith. So to me, I just don't see anything that is different about the 104 work that we're doing now that's different from years past. So very reluctantly, I'm not in favor of this.
Thank you. Commissioner Kaye?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to strongly support this amendment. I would have offered it if my colleague had not offered it. I do very much disagree with Commissioner Adler. I think there is a big difference here, and it's not 7 or 8 years. We're actually almost 10 years after the bill was enacted into law, and I do think that there is a big expectation, or there has been, that we would adjust these products. Unfortunately, these products, especially changing tables and high chairs, they're not only critical to parents who believe that these products are being tested pursuant to some type of government regulation before they come on the market, even though they're not. They're still causing deaths and injuries. Every month that we delay, I think, is a big problem. And I see, to Commissioner Robinson's point, I see no safety justification for having any sort of delay. And the difference here is, in the past, we have had to accommodate real technical issues like exist on gates right now, where we may have wanted to have a rulemaking on a certain timeline, but it just was not technically feasible. What is different here is that we would be actively blessing, for no safety purpose, an unnecessary delay, and I'm just not comfortable with that, and so I am looking forward to strongly supporting this amendment, and I'm glad it was offered.
Commissioner Mohorovic?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I think I'll reluctantly oppose this amendment as well, and I'd like to pose the thought that at some point in time our development of 104s should likely end, though I don't believe Congress has given us any instructions in terms of when that mandate will ever end. It's been a point of contention and debate, I think healthy debate, with reasonable opinions posed on both sides in terms of the expansion of 104s into what categories should logically be considered durable nursery products. But when Congress gave us the expectation, I think 2 per year, is that right? I'm looking for a nod. Thank you for. Yeah, okay, so 4 per year in terms of our rulemaking. At the point in time that our staff, through, and I know I can say with confidence, without having confirmation, that they would be informed by our policy on prioritization, has considered not moving these, the following durable nursery product 104 rules that Commissioner Robinson has proposed that we move back up ahead in terms of its promulgation versus gathering data. They have not determined that they're either ready for that, or perhaps that it meets the prioritizations that are laid out in our regulation 109.8. I'll also recognize that we've come to a point in time, I think, with many of our 104s that, as well-intentioned as the process is in the voluntary standards, that many of these voluntary standards do not address the hazards that we're seeing with the product. Through all the good intentions of our staff and those participating in the voluntary standards, we're just not getting there. I think the sling standard, for one, comes to mind, as well as some of the others that I think Commissioner Kaye has mentioned as well. So for those, it's great, I guess, if you're in the testing industry. And as one that was in the testing industry, when we promulgate these rules, it requires mandatory third-party testing and mandatory third-party testing for many small manufacturers, and this is becoming an ever-increasing burden on the U.S. economy, and I would argue that it puts the United States at a competitive disadvantage internationally. So we should move very, very carefully in terms of adopting 104s and be sure that there's going to be an adequate return on investment and what it'll cost firms to have to do third-party testing. We have internal costs with regards to creating accreditation for the labs that will apply to do the mandatory third-party testing, and then the certification obligations, which may also then create a burden at our port and paperwork burden. So I don't personally adhere to a knee-jerk reaction to want to promulgate 104s. I'm a little bit conflicted in the fact that that in terms of strict construction, I take that congressional mandate very seriously. But however, when Congress didn't give us an end point at some point in time, I think the assumption is that the commission would determine at what point in time we're done promulgating 104s, or unless one would think that the instruction for Congress is for us to move beyond the identified and the enumerated product categories for 104 development and keep applying new ones that are beyond what was enumerated by Congress. So I think I'll join Commissioner Adler and reluctantly oppose this amendment as well for reasons that I think staff has carefully identified the need to develop more data behind the voluntary standards before maybe needlessly pushing forward in a time frame before voluntary standards are ripe for adoption.
Would the Commissioner yield for a question?
Certainly.
Just something you just said. You said that staff needs more time. I was just curious where you had gotten the fact that this delay was because staff, this is the first time I've heard of it, that staff proposed this delay, and maybe Commissioner Robinson has heard this too, I don't know, that staff proposes delay specifically to develop more data associated with these standards, because that's new information to me.
I've not heard that either.
Well, I would like to just go with the staff's recommendation in terms of I have not been in the business of micromanaging the performance of these individually, so therefore I'm happy to stay with the staff's recommendation on where they should reside on our mandatory rulemaking schedule.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Commissioner Mohorovic. Commissioner Robinson?
I am very disappointed in the lack of support from Commissioner Adler and Commissioner Mohorovic. I will say that in terms of the, quote, slippage of 104 rules, unquote, in my 4 years as a commissioner, while I've certainly seen instances where it was required that we move something into the next op plan because it hadn't been finished for, in my recollection, very good reasons, but it would be finished, or we have decided that it should be carried over into the next fiscal year. I have never, in 4 years as a commissioner, seen us move the goal back, which I think is a very, very, very bad precedent. And with respect to Commissioner Mohorovic, while you spoke very generally about 104s and knee-jerk 104s and third-party testing, in this instance, my motion is with respect to 4 specific 104s that are either completely ripe or very close to ripe to finish a rule and protect children with respect to these 4 product areas. So I'm just very disappointed.
Thank you. Are there any other questions for Commissioner Robinson? Having heard no further questions to Commissioner Robinson, we will now move to vote on the motion. Commissioner Adler, how do you vote?
Reluctantly, no.
Commissioner Robinson?
Strongly aye.
Commissioner Kaye?
Strongly aye.
Commissioner Mohorovic?
Commissioner Robinson has moved me from reluctantly to strongly no.
And I vote no. The yeas are 2 and the nays are 3. The motion by Commissioner Robinson has not been passed. Are there any other amendments or motions?
Another amendment, Madam Chair.
Commissioner Robinson, I will recognize you for your amendment and then ask you to describe it. And then after that, we will ask our questions of you.
The second amendment is a small one, but I think an important one. On page 4, table 4, I am moving to delete the text in the column reason for change for the mandatory standards information disclosure under 6B of the CPSIA 1101 and voluntary recall.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Having heard the second, we'll now move to questions. I do not have any questions for Commissioner Robinson. Commissioner Adler?
No questions.
Commissioner Kaye?
None, but I'm happy to yield to Commissioner Robinson if she wants to explain
I'd like
more
to
about
describe it if I could.
Sorry.
As I've made clear on countless occasions, I am very disappointed that the Commission has never found a way to move forward with these NPRs. I understand they're controversial, but also I understand that most of that controversy is largely manufactured. I understand there's been a lot of pressure on the CPSC to avoid moving forward on these. However, I strongly believe that these 2 rules are related to safety. Proposed 1101 rule would help us keep the public informed of product hazards by removing self-imposed limitations that the CPSC adopted, which are much over and above the restrictions in Section 6B. And the proposed voluntary recall rule would help us achieve more effective recalls and get more dangerous products out of consumers' hands. I've been trying to keep these two rulemaking processes alive for a long time, but unsuccessfully. It's clear to me that we are not going to see any work done on these in the near future, and it's not realistic to have these as final rules due this fiscal year. That's the reason I voted in favor of the reg agenda, where we inform the public that they shouldn't expect these two rulemaking processes to move forward. However, my vote for the reg agenda was simply to reflect this reality and not to set policy or priorities. Our vote today, as opposed to the vote for the reg agenda, is an opportunity for the Commission to set policy and priorities. Since it's clear that finalizing these rules is not the current Commission's priority, I reluctantly support removing these two rules from the list of rules that the Commission expects to finalize. However, I cannot agree with the stated reason for change. As I mentioned above, the vote no on the reg agenda did not set policy nor set priorities. It merely reflected the reality. The reason for removing these rules from the list of mandatory standards to be completed this year cannot be simply to reflect a vote on a reg agenda, which is simply an informational document. Therefore, I propose removing the language in the reason for change section of Table 4 of these two rules, and I'd like to take this opportunity to state my hope that someday, obviously after my life on the Commission, that these two rules will be taken up again, because I really do believe that they promote safety.
Thank you, Commissioner Robinson. Now we'll begin a round of questions by the Commissioners. I do not have any questions. Commissioner Adler?
I have no questions. I plan to vote in support of the motion.
Commissioner Kaye?
No questions, thank you.
Commissioner Mohorovic?
I do have a question. Thank you, Madam Chairman. Commissioner Robinson, I'm a strong proponent in terms of documents like this to do their very best to reflect reality in terms of the Commission's expectations, and I appreciate your disappointment for the Commission not moving forward on those rules in particular, and I think, as you mentioned, in the 4 years that you've been on the Commission. I might be in support of this amendment if I felt that it was a better reflection of the direction of the agency, since that's a strong priority of mine, that we provide the public as accurate as possibly stated without being able to forecast future votes, of course, and it doesn't, these documents do not inhibit our ability to move matters off the agenda beyond what's forecasted in some of these documents. But could you help describe why removing the language would better reflect reality for a public that might want to use this, or Congress who might want to use this to do their best to understand what the Commission's expectations are for the rest of the fiscal year?
I think it's important to distinguish when you say documents like this, Commissioner Mohorovic, that documents like the op plan and the midyear are an opportunity for us to set priorities and to set policy. The reg agenda is a very, very different document and simply reflects reality. So I am supporting, obviously, removing voluntary recall and the 11016B from any sort of activity during this fiscal year. But to say that we're being driven by the reg agenda, which is an informational document only, is turning it on its head. The driving force is the op plan and the midyear.
Well, thank you, Commissioner Robinson. You drew a contrast between different planning documents, and you said you identified some that I think you said reflected reality. Could you help inform me in terms of understanding where your votes are? Which documents reflect reality and which ones are just smoke and mirrors?
I think that's a very unfair question, because it's not what I said at all. We as a Commission set priorities and policy through our operational plan and through our midyear. That's what we do with those documents. When it comes to the reg agenda, we tell people what in fact is happening with respect to our op plan and our midyear, because sometimes the reality of what is happening ends up being somewhat different for a variety of reasons from what our priorities and our policies were that we set in the op plan in the midyear.
Thank you. I appreciate you doing your best to answer that question, and I appreciate your perspective. I would disagree in terms of the regulatory agenda, as it sometimes suggests that different rulemakings are going to go to final rule when any informed stakeholder would recognize that there's no movement. So in fact, they're purposefully put out there to misinform the public. I can't really understand the great purpose of that. I don't know why you've supported regulatory agendas that have been inaccurate in the past. Regardless of where you might want individual rules to move within there, I'm a strong proponent that they should do their very best to reflect where the agency is going. I think we now know that some of them reflect reality, some reflect mystery, or perhaps we put them out there to appease certain stakeholder groups that have a strong interest in certain rulemakings, and we want to give them the false impression that we're really working hard on something when in fact the Commission has no intention of moving forward on certain regulatory activities. Thank you, Madam Chairman. I don't have any other questions. And
I would
appreciate
like
you
to make a point of personal privilege. I think that that was a very personal attack and a very unfair and untrue attack on me personally and my credibility, and it was a character assassination. If you would like to speak specifically about things in a reg agenda that I voted for that were somehow dishonest, I'm happy to address that. At this moment, we are talking about two things and two things only. That is 1101 and voluntary recall. Because the Commission was not moving forward on it, I voted to take them out of the reg agenda, to say that we weren't moving forward on them. That was a fact. And now I'm simply saying that stating that fact did not set policy. To say that that is setting policy would be an erroneous statement in our midyear.
Does anyone else have any questions for Commissioner Robinson? Commissioner Robinson, do you have any comments or responses to any of the discussion other than
I
what we've
don't.
already-
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Having heard no other questions, we will now vote on Commissioner Robinson's amendment. Commissioner Adler, how do you vote?
Aye.
Commissioner Robinson?
Aye.
Commissioner Kay?
Aye.
Commissioner Mohorovic?
No.
And I vote aye. The ayes have it, 4 to 1 nay. The motion by Commissioner Robinson has been approved. Are there any other additional amendments or motions this morning?
I have an amendment, please, Madam Chair.
Commissioner Kay, I will recognize you for your amendment.
Thank you. I'll take my 3 minutes to describe it and then hope that there's a second. My amendment is actually a collective effort, along with Commissioners Adler and Robinson, to make a few adjustments to the much-appreciated staff package before us. I do want to thank Commissioner Adler, Commissioner Robinson, and their staffs for working so closely with my office and my staff to put this together. I'm going to just very briefly walk through the changes, just touch lightly on the changes that Commissioner Adler and Commissioner Robinson have put in here because they're going to explain it more during their time. At my request, we added a Tier 1 project, a proposed project to create systems and procedures to facilitate, consistent with all applicable law, and that's important, the regular publication of monthly corrective action plan progress reports to better inform consumers and other stakeholders about recall effectiveness. And in layperson's terms, those are the reports that manufacturers or any other recalling party must submit to us on a monthly basis to give us a sense as to how well or not well that recall is coming along. I think that is a critical piece of government openness, government transparency, and more informed and better consumer choice, and I would imagine anyone who supports those three principles would strongly support this project. At my request, I also was pleased that we are proposing moving the Healthy Children's Chronic Hazards Project up in priority. I've said this many times, probably ad nauseum. Parents deserve to know whether or not their children are being adversely affected by chronic exposure to chemicals, especially on a chronic basis. I think we have an obligation and a duty to continue our work in that area, and I'd like to see this project move forward. Commissioner Adler strongly supported moving up the ATV projects, as well, I'm sure, as Commissioners Robinson and I did. We're also, at Commissioner Adler's request, removing a CO sensor project that he'll explain more about. Commissioner Robinson wanted to move up injury estimate methodology projects, and we also had to adjust other projects downward in priority to add those in. I do want to again thank our offices and look forward to taking any questions.
Thank you, Commissioner Kay. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you.
Second.
I'll second. I'll second. Having heard a second, we will now move to consideration of Commissioner Kay's amendment. Commissioners will ask their questions, and then we'll come back to at the end to yield to you for any questions you might or response you might have. I do not have any questions at this time. Commissioner Adler?
No questions, but one or two comments. First of all, I want to thank my fellow commissioners for working together so collaboratively, and their staff in particular for endless meetings, trying to discern our minds and speak on behalf of us, and I'm sure my staff did much more eloquently than I did. And so this is, to me, this is a vastly improved list of projects by priority, and I think really reflects some incredibly careful thought. What I would like to do is just make a brief comment about the removal of the cost-benefit analysis of CO sensors. This is a project that would dedicate $125,000 to supporting a cost-benefit analysis for a voluntary standard that would address the feasibility of developing a CO shutoff response system. I greatly admire the staff work that's gone into attempting to persuade the industry for many, many, many years to adopt such a safety mechanism. I've always believed that such a system is feasible and necessary for consumer safety. Regrettably, the industry has long maintained strong opposition to adopting such technology. To me, this means the Commission should move towards proposing and promulgating a mandatory standard. I fail to see how our doing a cost-benefit analysis is likely to convince those who don't want to be convinced to proceed with the voluntary standard. And I might be wrong about this because my memory fades over time, but I can't remember a time in the Commission's 40-plus years when we undertook a cost-benefit analysis for those developing a voluntary standard. I worry about the precedent of doing so. Should the time arrive when the Commission is working on a mandatory standard, I will obviously strongly support our doing a cost-benefit analysis, but any such analysis we may do, should we get to a mandatory standard, is going to be way out of date and not terribly useful. So I'm delighted to see my colleagues join in the motion to drop this expenditure, and I do want to add one word. This is something that staff involved in the process feel very, very strongly about, and I've had a number of conversations with them, but I feel a need to at least have one more conversation about this so that we can fully air any staff concerns. And I was reminded this morning that I think we have 3 days after a vote to, if we decide to change our minds. I do want to meet and discuss this with staff because this is something that should be fully aired. I thought that it had been fully aired, but just in the interest of trying to maintain my own connection with and relationship with and credibility with the staff, I am going to try to sit down very, very quickly and have further discussions. But again, I thank the staff and I thank my colleagues.
Thank you, Commissioner Adler. Commissioner Robinson?
I don't have any questions. I want to thank my fellow commissioners for working so hard, and especially our staffs. As Commissioner Adler said, I'm sure they did a much better job of representing what our interests were than what we could have, and we came up with a priority list that I very much support. I would also like to thank Commissioner Kay for his excellent proposal to add monthly progress reports. I love that I think we all supported Chair Burkle's amendment that added the electronic reports, and now to have the output of informing the public, I think is very, very helpful. The changes that were most important to me in this amendment were moving the 2 injury estimation methodology projects up the priority list. As everyone knows, improving our data has been a major focus of mine throughout my tenure. We make better decisions and do our job better if we improve our data capabilities. These 2 projects that have been moved up are one, that the NICE data that we've been using as we all know, have been making nationwide estimates, but they do not enable us to focus on smaller geographic areas. We know, at least anecdotally, that injuries are not evenly dispersed across the country. Geographic, climate, population, cultural differences mean that certain products are more popular or used differently across the country, and injury patterns likely reflect that. This injury estimation methodology small area project will allow us to delve into these differences, which means we can better understand the hazards and injury patterns and find better policy solutions and target our education and information campaigns more appropriately. Similarly, I've long felt that our data do not accurately reflect the true cost of non-fatal injuries, and perhaps this comes from my many years as a litigator. I felt this especially strongly in our recent table saw NPR, where I believe the cost of amputations was greatly underestimated. The injury estimation methodology, fatal, non-fatal project, will go a long way to improving these data, and as a result, our analysis of the benefits. Unfortunately, obviously, we had to move some things down. I didn't have as much problem moving down the Crt TV study for the simple reason that as part of my work on tip-overs, my staff and I have had a number of conversations with manufacturers, retailers, and the safety community about Crt TVs and how difficult it is to get them out of people's homes, particularly when they're working just fine. We know that it's hard to motivate people to get these heavy things out for recycling. And we also know, most importantly, that industry is simply not inclined to provide incentive in terms of rebates or discounts in exchange for people bringing in their TVs for recycling. So I don't believe that this proposal would provide much by way of additional information or solution as long as industry is unwilling to provide incentive. The one that I most reluctantly moved down was Anchorage, because I think this has just been an outstanding campaign and we've done some great things. However, as I've told Ms. Davis and Ms. Dulick, I love the fact that what we've produced in-house has somehow, through their efforts, I don't mean somehow, through their efforts, made it so widely into the media, whether it's social media, cable TV, network TV, or mommy blogs, and some of these efforts will continue. I am going to be very interested in what happens when we get our study together about the effectiveness of the Anchorage Campaign. As I think everyone knows, since I've said it ad nauseum, where we really ought to be focusing is on the stability of furniture. This campaign has been a great stopgap while we're addressing that, and I hope that we are able to fund it in the future, because it has been an outstanding campaign. But none of my consideration of moving this down is in any way a reflection of anything whatsoever negative about staff. Quite the opposite. They've just been absolutely fantastic.
Thank you. Commissioner Mohorovic?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Commissioner, I know you expect me to ask a question about Anchorage. I think outside of the project that Commissioner Adler identified, which has been removed, I think the biggest policy move within the reshuffling from staff's priorities was moving Anchorage down from the third highest priority all the way down to Tier 2, the number 16 slot. And you can imagine how disappointed I was to see this. We've spoken about this. I don't want to offend you. I don't want to question. These are a matter of priorities in terms of projects. I don't want to get you upset with you or make you cry. But could you just describe why Anchorage gives you so little confidence to move it all the way down from the third highest priority in Midyear down to 16?
Sure, happy to answer that question, and hopefully without crying. So, a couple of issues. One is getting, well, probably three answers. One is getting other projects that I think have a more immediate safety payoff in there. Lithium-ion batteries obviously should be in there. I think monthly progress reports is super important for consumers to make very informed decisions about the effectiveness of recalls that are happening on a day-to-day basis. So I do think that's an important project. Many of these things that were moved up here have real payoffs in how we do our job, as Commissioner Robinson described, and even the ATV work, I think, is critical. So that's the issue. I think that there are projects that have the ability to have a bigger impact on a safety basis that I'd like to see funded. That was the first part of it. The second part of it, which you and I have had many discussions about, and we've talked about publicly, is that evaluative component. And that the more money that we spend on this, the more concerned I am that we really just don't know whether it's working. And I very much appreciate the comments earlier by Ms. Davis about the change in emergency department times on average. I hope that's because of this campaign, but I haven't seen the work that would underlie that thought. If that work has been done and there is a study that shows that our campaign is the primary cause of that, that'd be fantastic. I'd love to see it. I'm not aware of it, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. So I just don't think that we've put in the money and the time to really assess it, and I think that, as you've talked about in retrospective review, there comes a time when something's been out there long enough when I think that it's worth assessing it. And the third reason is that my understanding is that these, and having been in the position where Acting Chairman Burkle is, where you communicate with staff more often about these projects and the timing, that because of where we sit this fiscal year, that there is still a good chance that this project will get funded, depending on how the contract processes go. And with that confidence, or greater confidence than maybe in other years, moving it down the list may not put it in quite the jeopardy that it would look like where it would sit should the amendment pass. I hope that helps.
It does, Commissioner, and I appreciate that these are all very worthy projects, and it's difficult to choose among them. But in terms of our policy, in terms of prioritization, if you're looking at the frequency and the severities of the injuries, the causality of the injuries. Now, I'll skip chronic injuries in future because that plays right into your decision to move up the Healthy Children Project, which is not what I would consider, should be considered a priority before the agency, but also specifically the unforeseen nature of the risk here presented by furniture tip over, that furniture that's in the home, and the vulnerability of the population at risk. Children. Those two are two of my favorite of the priorities. That interpretive rule, of course, was not promulgated by this commission, but they are two that I think, when we are at our best at an agency and we're addressing latent hazards in the physical and mechanical arena, as opposed to the opposite, patent hazards, as demonstrated by ATVs. When somebody gets on an ATV or an ROV or operates a table saw, they have a lot better understanding of the risks that they're taking. And moving up chronic hazard work ahead of acute hazard work are matters generally of policy that I can't support. So for those reasons, I appreciate the work that you went through. I appreciate you take my criticism as just being only that, as two policymakers having a disagreement about priorities before the agency. But for those reasons, with Anchorage being jeopardized in terms of losing the momentum that we've gained, are reasons that I can't support your amendment, and I wish you had not put Anchorage at such jeopardy, and perhaps a slight reshuffling might be something that I could support. But I do appreciate and recognize the fact that this does not necessarily mean the end of Anchorage for the next 12 months, as we do have the now, albeit the much lower chance that it gets funded. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Kaye, would you like to comment
thank you.
on any questions?
Thank you, Acting Chair, Madam Chair. The only follow-up I would say is I agree completely, Commissioner Mohorovic, with that analysis of the hazard. But Anchorage, or an education campaign, in my opinion, is not the most effective way to go about addressing it. So this is just a difference of opinion as to using the agency's resources. I'm much more interested in the voluntary standard effort and ultimately a mandatory standard effort, as well as what you alluded to earlier, which is potentially any recalls that could address products that present a substantial product hazard. So just because we may disagree about Anchorage doesn't mean we disagree about the nature of the hazard and the other factors that you presented and how the Commission might assess its priority addressing the hazard writ large as opposed to Anchorage, if that makes sense.
Are there any other questions for Commissioner Kaye regarding his amendment? Having heard no further questions to Commissioner Kaye, we will now move to vote on his amendment. Commissioner Adler, how do you vote?
I vote aye.
Commissioner Robinson?
Aye.
Commissioner Kaye?
Aye.
Commissioner Mohorovic?
No.
And I vote aye. The yeas are 4 and the nays are 1. The amendment by Commissioner Kaye has been approved. Are there any other additional amendments or motions here at the dais this morning? Having heard no further amendments or motions, we will now turn to the final vote on the FY 2017 mid-year review and proposed operating plan adjustments as amended. We will have time for closing remarks, but at this time, does anyone else wish to be heard before we take the vote on the proposed rule? I have no comments. Commissioner Adler? Commissioner Robinson? Commissioner Kay?
None.
Commissioner Mohorovic? Having heard no further comments, we'll now move to the final vote, and I will now call it. This is on the FY 2017 mid-year review and proposed operating plan adjustments as were amended this morning. Commissioner Adler, how do you vote?
Aye.
Commissioner Robinson?
Aye.
Commissioner Kay?
Aye.
Commissioner Mohorovic?
No.
And I vote aye. The ayes have it, 4 ayes, and the nays are 1. The 2017 mid-year review and proposed operating plan adjustments as amendment has been approved. We now turn to closing statements, and we will have up to 10 minutes per commissioner for closing remarks, and I will begin. Again, I want to express my sincere thanks to staff, both the staff that is sitting out there, the staff who may not be here this morning, and to all of our staffs. These types of initiatives take a tremendous amount of work, and I would guess if I logged the miles they walked up and down the hall, they would have probably exceeded marathons, 26.2 miles, I believe. They have worked incredibly hard to reach the agreement, and it's not everything that I had hoped for in this mid-year package, but it does generally reflect our staff's priorities, and there were some changes from my colleagues. It's not, again, everything that I wished for, but I believe the strengths are enough to outweigh some of my concerns. And obviously, we are a bipartisan commission, and it is going to be a rare day here when everyone agrees with each other and with the outcome of our votes. I believe that the new project relating to the monthly project reports is premature. It's obvious we should be completing work on the first phase of the project, providing for electronic filing of the monthly progress reports before we worry about what comes next. I know that some of my colleagues are concerned about how long this is taking, and I share that frustration because I pushed this project, enabling the electronic filing of monthly progress reports, back in February of 2016. It's taken an inordinate amount of time to complete. However, I still believe it would still be better for us to get that work done before we proceed and gain some new experience having that project completed with a new system now scheduled for completion in September before we move ahead with any follow-up work. I also think that we are going to have, as you know, an upcoming workshop on recall effectiveness. And certainly we should be listening during that workshop before taking any additional steps when it comes to recall effectiveness. I'm very pleased that the mid-year plan included as the #1 priority lithium-ion batteries. I appreciate the top priority that was given to what the staff is doing with regards to lithium-ion batteries. This is a cross-cutting safety topic, and I believe there's more that we can do to help manufacturers move towards greater safety. Other projects at the top of the priority list approved by the Commission also reflect my priorities. These include the project to update and strengthen the regulatory robot, which is a powerful tool, and we've heard such good reviews from the outside that they can learn more about our regulations and which ones apply to a given product. I strongly support the new e-filing study. That makes sense to me. It will aim to discover what the value is of certain types of information for targeting. Logically, this should be completed before we consider any other additional projects with regards to e-filing. Several other projects reflect my strong support for improving our capabilities to manage and analyze data. I'm pleased that the Commission saw fit to support staff's proposal concerning the 5 standards for durable nursery products. I believe this is a case where a bit of extra flexibility in our schedule will ultimately save the staff from a lot of needless effort. All in all, I see that the package is one that will take good advantage of the additional resources that are available to this point. I do want to express my chagrin as Commissioner Mohorovic with regards to the Anchorage Campaign. We in this agency are doing a lot on the compliance side, on the standard side, and this was a good complement to address this acute hazard of tip-overs and how it affects young children. So I hope that this will, as Commissioner Mohorovic mentioned, Commissioner Kay mentioned, will be able to be funded this fiscal year. And certainly that we will be able to continue the very important messaging and the education and information campaign associated with Anchorage. And I do want to thank the Office of Communications for the work they do with that. I want to just say one comment because this is a little bit uncomfortable, but I do want to say I think we should, at this dais, be careful that we treat each other with respect and we don't get into personal attacks on each other, and we stick to policy. We have a lot to deal with as commissioners and with as an agency that are very important issues, that we keep the consumer safe from unreasonable risks. That's a large mission we have. It continues to challenge us every day, and I think that's where our focus should be on. Again, my sincere thanks to all of the staff for your work, for what you've done to get us here today. And with that, I yield to Commissioner Adler.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. You know, I don't know how many of you remember Sophie's Choice, but every time we have meetings like this, it just is uppermost in my mind, having to choose between two incredibly valuable and dear subjects, in this case, children. That's what we've been doing. There are very few projects on this list, maybe none, with maybe one exception, that aren't extraordinarily worthy projects and that have great merit. We know the staff spends endless hours debating this and coming up with the best set of recommendations they can, and then it shifts to the policymakers, and you can tell we all have very, very strong feelings about different projects, and at some point in the mix you have to compromise and you end up, as Chairman Burkle said, not what I wished for, but it's a good second choice, and I think that we've seen the Commission today really struggling to come up with the best approach to implementing our mandate, which is so precious and so important. I did want to give a little bit of a nod to Chairman Burkle. If I recall correctly, lithium-ion batteries was one of your favorite projects, and it's something I think everybody at this table agrees with, so I commend you for pushing it and supporting it. I did also want to echo this notion about the collegiality of the Commission. I think we have been setting an example for years about how an agency where people with different policy perspectives and different political views can work together, and I hope we continue doing that. I say this till I'm blue in the face as opposed to red in the face, that product safety should not be a partisan issue. It just shouldn't be. And I think that we have done our best over the years to demonstrate that. So I'm very proud of my colleagues here today, and I hope we continue to operate in a very effective collegial manner.
Thank you. Commissioner Robinson.
Thank you. I also would like to thank everyone who's worked so hard on this. Our staff's up here most recently, but certainly you sitting out there, both watching and sitting here in person. You've just done an amazing job. We have a number of proposed projects, each with their own merits, and given our limited resources, we do the best we can to prioritize them. On the reordering of the recommended projects, let me just reiterate that I am delighted that we were able to move up the priority of the data projects, the injury estimation methodology small area, and the injury estimation methodology fatal and non-fatal. With our onerous cost-benefit analyses that we have to do, we have to have as good a data as we can possibly get. And I know that that's something that Chairman Burkle and I have had multiple conversations about, and that we strongly agree on that. And let me just once again say on Anchorage, there is nothing up here that's being said in terms of the positive comments about Anchorage that I would even come close to disagreeing with. In fact, I very much agree with it. But when you look at our list of projects and the lives that are going to be saved with these different list of projects, I'm hoping that we can still be able to support Anchorage, but I just had to reluctantly vote to prioritize other things over that. With respect to the monthly progress reports, we're always looking for ways to improve transparency, and I was delighted, as I said, that Chairman Burkle suggested that we approve the electronic intake. Watching these monthly progress reports, once we've come up with corrective action plans that we spend so much time and energy negotiating, and then to see monthly progress reports that are less than fabulous has always been frustrating to me. So I think making these electronic, both coming in and giving access to those outside of the agency to those progress reports, I hope that those two things are going to drive the recall effectiveness that we all up here care so much about. Section 104, I've already said why I'm very disappointed that this didn't pass. By revising the expected deliverable to DATR, we're allowing for unnecessary delays. I've spoken with staff about the progress of these rules, and many key decisions in the voluntary standards with respect to the rules are set to take place even as early as this month. And I just don't think we're accomplishing anything positive by moving the target back. Removing the reason for change from the Lebanon voluntary recall, I think that I've explained why that was so important to me that we do that, and I thank my fellow commissioners for supporting that. Our agency operating plan and mid-year adjustments serve as a roadmap outlining the critical path to achieve an end result. The mid-year is essential to the function of the agency, and I appreciate the careful thought and consideration that went into producing this document. The projects described in the mid-year aim to enhance safety and protect consumers, especially for our most vulnerable consumers, infants and children. And it's my hope we're able to fund as many of these projects as possible, and we can plainly see what we stand to lose by shortage of funding. It's not easy to choose one project over the other, as Commissioner Adler so eloquently explained, and I thank my fellow commissioners for proposing and considering amendments, and for everyone working together to put this mid-year plan together. And I also would like to echo Chair Burkle's and Commissioner Adler's comments with respect to how critical I think it is that this agency remains something that is as nonpartisan as possible. We're here for the safety of people, and personal attacks are not something that make any of us look good. And I am proud to be a part of this commission, and I hope that we will continue to do this across party lines. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Robinson. Commissioner Kay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll just keep it short. I want to thank again the staff for all the great work that went into it, as well as my office and the other offices. It's an important part of the year in our financial planning and our execution of projects, and I'm glad that we have something to move forward with. And I also want to thank the chair in particular for supporting the mid-year and giving it a bipartisan, the mid-year as amended, and giving it a bipartisan stamp of approval. I think that is putting action into words of trying to have that bipartisan, nonpartisan approach to public safety. So thank you.
Chairman Horovic.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'd like to address the subject of collegiality among my peers here on this dais, as well as today I've been accused of personally attacking a colleague. I take that accusation very, very seriously, and I look forward to reviewing the tape to review my own actions. It is no surprise to anybody on this commission in terms of my desire to see all of CPSC's planning documents do their very, very best to reflect the agency's path forward, its priorities, our expectations, as I think it's critical for the public for transparency. And I believe that efforts, while it might be institutional in terms of, well, this is the way things have always been done, I think that is not acceptable in terms of if it gives the public a false sense or a false idea in terms of what will be coming up with the agency and when. Most of these planning documents have been mandated by law, as it was Congress's intention to have the public fully informed. For somebody to think that, or to suggest that, that it is a personal attack for me to have a problem when I see planning documents that I don't think accurately reflect the agency's intentions over the course of months or fiscal years or future years, they shouldn't take that personally. They just absolutely shouldn't. I don't think anybody who looked at this debate over Anchorage would consider it was certainly not an attack by me, or it shouldn't be interpreted as an attack. For anybody that feels that that's a less worthy project means that any particular commissioner cares less about the injuries and the fatalities associated with furniture tip-over. I don't believe that, and I know my colleagues don't believe that either. So therefore, when I want to see that our documents do their best to foretell what the agency is going to be working on in the future, I don't consider that a personal attack. I just don't. So I'm not going to accept the fact that that I have broken the norms that have been established on this commission in my 3 years in the commission. And I'll take this opportunity, as I have on several occasions, to congratulate Commissioner Kay. I think this was a priority of his. He certainly expressed that to me before either one of us were confirmed by the Senate, that it was a desire for him, if confirmed as chairman, to see this agency work collegially, and I've enjoyed that. And that is a norm that I fully try to adhere to and do the best I can and celebrate it. And I'm here to celebrate it again. And I know you'll have, Chairman Burkle, you'll have my support in that ground too. But what I won't accept is anything that I've said over the course of today having to do with our planning documents being fantasy or smoke and mirrors versus reality to be a personal attack. Anybody who took it as one shouldn't. And so if somebody is waiting for an apology, they're not going to get one here today. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner Mohorovic. This concludes the public meeting of the United States Consumer Product Safety Commission, and I again want to thank all of you for being here and who joined us via the webinar. This meeting is now adjourned.